Fond du Lac County Sheriff Ryan Walschmidt, and this is District Attorney Eric Toney. We know there's been a lot of public interest as well as a lot of assistance from those not directly involved in the crash that occurred on December 31st at 1:10 a.m. on US Highway 45 south of Sandy Road. This location is near the Fond du Lac Washington County line in the town of Auburn, and we wanted to hold this press conference in order to provide an update and provide some context into this ongoing investigation. I'll start by saying we know there are a lot of people hurting, both physically and emotionally, as a result of these tragic events that occurred that evening. And we're doing everything in our power to get to the truth, to get to the bottom of what happened, and ultimately to hold those accountable for the actions that they took that night that played a role in harming others. When rescue personnel arrived on scene, it became quickly apparent that not only did we have a complex crash scene, we also had individuals already missing and vehicles that were already removed from the scene that were involved in the sequence of tragic events that had transpired. Deputies from both the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office and the Washington County Sheriff's Office, along with our crash reconstructionists, detectives, and even myself responded to this scene where we worked in conjunction with the Fond du Lac and Washington County Medical Examiner's offices and the Fond du Lac County DA's office to begin what I would describe as one of the most complex crash investigations that I've seen in my 25 plus years working here at the Sheriff's Office. Although this investigation remains very much active and ongoing, what we know and what we can share without compromising the integrity of the investigation is this. Most individuals that were involved in this incident were coming from an underage drinking party that occurred in the town of Auburn, where both alcohol and drugs were consumed by both minors and adults. Shortly before this crash, several vehicles left the party and were traveling south on US Highway 45 when one of the vehicles left the roadway, struck a culvert, rolled over, and 4 of the 5 occupants of that vehicle were ejected. At least 2 of those occupants that were ejected from the vehicle came to rest in the roadway, and after that initial crash, several other vehicles passed through and or stopped at the crash scene. One of those vehicles struck 19-year-old Taya Grimes of Hartford, who was one of the victims lying in the roadway. Sadly, this vehicle left the scene and drug her 3 miles into and through the village of Kewaskum, where she then came to rest on US Highway 45 south of Kewaskum. Through the course of this investigation, we've determined that a second occupant that had been ejected in that first crash and who also came to rest in the roadway was also likely struck by the same vehicle that drug Taya from the scene. That victim, a 17-year-old Iron Ridge teenager, remains hospitalized and in critical condition. His mother told us in an update just a short time ago that he's a fighter and he remains fighting. 3 of the 5 occupants in that first crash were transported by ambulances to various hospitals. Taya was killed, and 1 occupant was removed from the scene by another vehicle and later dropped off at a hospital. I think you can all appreciate, after hearing these basic details, of what are a very complex set of circumstances, how and why this has been and is going to be a lengthy investigation. Deputies, crash reconstructionists, and detectives have been working on this investigation nonstop since last Sunday morning. A lot of evidence has been seized. We've utilized the assistance of the Wisconsin Department of Justice Crime Scene Response Unit to collect forensic evidence from multiple vehicles. And we've interviewed dozens of witnesses and people involved in this incident throughout the past week, and we continue to do so even at this moment. As I've mentioned before, this is one of the most complex crash investigations we've been involved in many years, and completing a thorough and accurate investigation to get to the bottom of what happened and to get to the truth takes time. There's also a lot of forensic evidence that has been collected that will take additional time to be analyzed at the crime lab. We have not had the cooperation from everyone involved that we would expect and hope for in a tragedy like this. That lack of cooperation began before we were even on scene, when people and vehicles chose to leave that scene rather than remain there and help those who were injured. We have arrested a 19-year-old Jatziel Encarnacion of West Bend for hit and run causing great bodily harm, and he remains in custody in our jail. We also continue to compile reports in preparation for a referral to the Fond du Lac County District Attorney's Office. We know there are more individuals out there who could provide information about the party, this initial crash, the secondary crash, and the individuals involved. We've had many come forward already and are asking that anyone who has not yet come forward reach out to us and ask to speak to investigators about what you know. You can call the dispatch center at 920-929-3390 and ask to speak to an investigator about this crash investigation, the underage drinking party, or any of the circumstances involved since this incident that night. Or you could also call anonymously and leave a tip on our Fond du Lac County tip line at 920-906-4777. I'll end with this. As complicated as this investigation is, this is what we do. We work until we get to the bottom of this. We work until we know the truth. And we owe it to Taya, we owe it to her family, we owe it to the other victims and their families to get to the bottom of this and ultimately hold accountable who needs to be held accountable for the sequence of events and the tragic events that occurred at the scene New Year's Eve morning. We also certainly put our hearts out to those family and those involved and those affected by this tragedy, and keep them in our thoughts and prayers as our team continues to work through this investigation. And with that, I'll now pass the microphones over to Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney, who, along with his staff, have been involved with us along the way through this entire investigation. Eric?
Thank you, Sheriff. I think everybody, upon hearing some of the details relayed by Sheriff Walschmidt, can imagine how difficult this is for the families that have been involved in this, and we express our condolences to all of those families involved. And it's been an incredibly complex investigation, and we've been in touch, as Sheriff Walschmidt said, since the very beginning. And I know there's been a lot of media that's reached out to my office to ask some questions about the status and where things might go. As you heard the sheriff say, they're still compiling those reports from what's been an incredibly complex investigation to send a referral to the district attorney's office. So we have not been able to review any reports, which, given the circumstances, I think seems understandable based on what Sheriff Walschmidt has described. There have been some questions. Many of you know that Fond du Lac County sends out what we like to call a jail list, and it lists a charge of charges that somebody may be held on. And one thing I do want to make crystal clear is anybody that's on that jail list or that has been referred to at this press conference is presumed innocent unless or until proven guilty. So when the sheriff's office continued the investigation, one of the challenges when you have a crash of this significance is determining where injuries may have come from. And based on the way the investigation has progressed, it is very difficult to determine if somebody may have been alive when they were struck by a vehicle or not, which presents some of those challenges. As Sheriff Walschmidt indicated, there is believed to be a second individual that may have been struck by a vehicle, and that's continuing to be investigated. And I can't stress enough, as the sheriff said, if you're out there and you have information, if you were at the party, if you know anything or somebody said something to you, please contact the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office and pass that information along. Do not assume that they already have that information, because there is a lot of things that they're still trying to track down and piece together or corroborate, and we are asking for the public's help to do that. There are likely many questions that some of you in the media or the public may have about this. Probably many of those questions we simply cannot answer, either to protect the integrity of the investigation, or legally we are not allowed to answer at this time. So we wanted to at least provide an update on where things are going, because we know, especially when you have kids involved in some of these type of horrific crashes, that people would like to know as much as possible, and sometimes there are just limitations on the information we're able to provide in a short time afterwards. So I think we're willing to take some questions, but as I said, there may be many that we can't answer.
Why is the PCA?
Can you say at this point if you know whether this individual knew that he struck one or both of these individuals, if you feel it was an accident and he may have panicked and left, if he didn't know that he struck this girl and that she was being dragged by his vehicle, do you have any answers to those questions?
Those are a lot of really good questions, much of which we're not gonna be able to get into the details today for some of the reasons that I stated before, where the sheriff's office is still looking to talk with witnesses, and we don't want somebody influenced by information that we might share here, and so they're still trying to run down leads, so.
Do we know if she was killed in the initial rollover crash, or was she killed from being dragged?
So whenever we have a fatality, there will be an autopsy that's performed. We do not have the results of the autopsy yet, and so that's information that we'll be continuing to wait for to see how that may impact the trajectory of the investigation.
And that would change the charges, right?
Well, like I said, we'll wait and see when we get those results and see if that would change the trajectory or not.
Why hasn't the probable cause affidavit been released? Why is it still sealed?
I think one outlet did report on the probable cause affidavit, but as I said, when Greg was asking his question, they're still running down a significant amount of leads, and we don't want some of those witnesses that may come forward influenced by information that they may hear in the media. And it's a really difficult balance for us because we know the public wants to know and has a right to know, but at the same time, we want to make sure we get to the truth and that people aren't influenced by some of that information. And that's partly why we're here today, to provide the information that we can provide and some answers to the public, while some of them we're just not able to provide yet.
District Attorney, could you clarify for us, if he's being held in the jail for hit and run, have those charges been officially filed yet, or you're waiting still?
So the process when we file charges, the DA's office here in Fond du Lac County, we don't have investigators, so we don't do investigation. We trust that to our excellent law enforcement. They generate the reports, documents, and even if they make an arrest, they send that referral with the police reports, crash reports, whatever it may be, to the district attorney's office to review and make a determination on charging. And so as Sheriff Walschmidt said, those reports have not yet been submitted to our office, and so no charges have been filed, as we have not yet had an opportunity to review the full investigation.
How long are you able to hold somebody before charges can be filed?
So I can't give you a specific answer to that question, but I guess I can answer it generally speaking this way. Normally, we have about 48 hours before we may have to make a determination on charges. We heard the question about the probable cause document, which in the legal world, we call it a Riverside. And if a court finds probable cause of some of those crimes, somebody can be held beyond the 48 hours.
So what questions do you guys have, because we want to get that out to the public, so what questions do you need answered from the public?
One thing, as I've been in contact with the investigators and the sheriff, if somebody was at that party and they saw any of the individuals that may have been at the scene of the crash or driving the vehicles in question and their level of potential impairment, if they were consuming alcohol, drugs, things of that nature, that's all very helpful information. Or if they weren't consuming alcohol or drugs, that would likewise be very helpful for the investigation. And anybody that may have driven through or been at the scene that saw something but maybe wasn't comfortable coming forward, or if you heard from somebody else that was at that party or was at the scene of the crash or talked with somebody that was there, please share that information with the investigators.
Do
Can
any
you
of
say
the
how you
adults
came
who
to
were
the
at the party
conclusion?
face potential charges?
So that's not anything we're gonna get into today as the investigation unfolds. I don't have enough information to answer that.
How did you come to the conclusion that this 19-year-old from West Bend was the driver that struck her? Can you say that?
Well, as I said before, and I don't think it ever hurts to reiterate this enough, anybody that's been mentioned so far in the press conference or that might be on the jail list is innocent unless or until proven guilty. And so at this point, the investigators have been tracking down as much information as they can and pointing them in the direction to make the decisions that they've been making, but nobody has been charged yet.
Can you spell his name, the suspect that you have arrested?
I don't have the spelling in front of me, but I'm sure that's something that can be gotten to.
Okay.
How many people have you interviewed already?
We were counted roughly more than a couple dozen, roughly, approximately.
Do you estimate that's the number that were at the party, or there were more?
No, that number includes people that were not at the party, but associated or affiliated with those kids and adults that were at the party, people involved at the crash, some witnesses, and then some friends or acquaintances. related to this group, but not necessarily at the party, who have both come forward or that we've tracked down.
Is that, Sheriff, is some of that uncooperation, is that coming from mainly people that were at the crash site? Is it also from people that were at the party, if you've been able to track them down?
Both, yep, there's people that were at both the party and or the crash scene who are not cooperating.
How does someone not know that they were dragging a body for more than 3 miles?
That's part of what we're trying to determine. I mean, that's all part of the investigation and what, that's not to water it down, but who knew and what did they know and when did they know it is keys to this investigation, and that's what we're working to drill down. I gave you the basic overview, but we get right down to the detail, of those, trying to answer those questions.
As you're still trying to work through the answers and figure it out, do you know when charges could be filed? Can we potentially expect for next week?
Yeah, we talked, we were interviewing more people today. I think there were some essential interviews and information we obtained today, so I would expect, as we work through the weekend to compile reports, I would expect early next week we would have those reports up to that point to the DA's office for a referral on charges, and then it'll be up to them to review everything that we've provided thus far and make a decision at that time whether or not he makes an initial appearance on charges.
Was Taya for sure driving? Taya Grimes.
That is part of the investigation, and right now, it's, I wouldn't say it's not relevant, but we're working to prove or disprove whether she was the driver of that first vehicle.
When's your next update?
Probably when, I would say when or if somebody is charged and a criminal complaint comes out, there will be additional details that we can't cover at this point, but that will be part of the probable cause for that criminal complaint. I don't have anything to add to that, but there will be more details if or when that happens.
For where the party was held, had you been familiar with that spot before? Any other run-ins?
We're familiar, law enforcement in general, again, this occurred near the county line with Washington. I will just say, many of these individuals are from Washington and or Dodge counties, so it's kind of a 3-county area that they live in, but some of the people involved are familiar to law enforcement.
Thank you.
Did that 19-year-old suspect, do you know if he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs?
The
19-year-old.
And Carnasio.
Yep, so we're working on determining that, and that's part of why we're looking for information and waiting for lab work and forensic evidence and all of those components to come together.
You
to
said-
determine that.
So are you able to share about any of the 5 people in Taya's car if they were not under the influence?
That's all part of the investigation, but right now I'm not, I don't know specifically who and what and down to the details of who may have been consuming drugs or alcohol or both, but we know that people were at this party consuming both.
When you say drugs were involved, what kind of drugs are you talking about? Marijuana, cocaine? What-
Yeah, I don't have those details other than illegal drugs. I didn't ask specifically, or I haven't seen specifically which drugs, but I know it was illegal drugs.
Just to be clear, I'm sorry, the initial release said alcohol believed to be a factor. We should not necessarily take that to mean in the car. Alcohol being a factor could mean the party in general.
Correct,
There've been
yes.
questions about the driver of the car, Taya specifically, being drunk or something.
Yep, yeah, and that's a potential, like I said, with all of these people involved and associating them back to the party, we're working to determine who may have consumed alcohol, and or drugs, what those drinks and or drugs were, and, how or if that played a role or a factor in this crash and the sequence of events that happened after the crash.
The party
Just
was not.
generally speaking, generally speaking, if we have an autopsy and we're trying to see the toxicology results, that does take time for the medical examiner. Some of them send those results out of state to get those results, so oftentimes that's not something that we have in the short term, even with some of the preliminary autopsy information.
Have you been able to speak at this point? I'm not sure exactly the conditions of the other people that were in the car during the crash. Have you gotten to speak with them yet?
Yeah, I mean, some of them have been interviewed, and all of them we are in contact with in some form. I don't know to what extent. It's all based on their injuries and recovery and respecting, their medical issues and things that, take precedence or priority based on the condition they're in. So that's all part of this, but, there will be more interviews and sometimes follow-up interviews when somebody is further recovered and those kinds of things.
What
Ben?
was, what was the general age range of the individuals at the party? I know the victims listed were between 16 and 21, you said there were adults there. Do we know more about the ages?
Yeah, teenage and then into early adulthood. I don't know if, there were a couple that were much older, I don't know exact ages, but I know there were adults over the age of 21 there, as well as, young adults or teenagers under the age of 21.
The party was in the town of Auburn, but can you share any more specifics about the location of it?
That's probably all, the further we're gonna get into, specifically where if you were at this party or know something about it, you probably know where it was, but that's why we wanna talk to you, but.
Was it can you say if it was like a residence or a business or?
I believe it was a private residence.
Is there any charges that could be filed in conjunction with that party at that private residence?
Potentially social hosting and/or, depending on what was all going on there, other charges related to, alcohol and/or drug distribution.
Not
When
the
did it
crash,
first-
though?
Go.
Can it carry over to the crash if she was known to have been inebriated at the party and then that would cause the initial crash?
Yeah, I don't wanna get too far into speculating, meaning I just don't know to that level of detail what occurred at the party and what transpired there and exactly how it may have influenced the crash, so I don't wanna speculate on what those charges potentially could be, but there are a lot of things. We'll look at, all of the possibilities and work to determine what, like I said, what the truth is, what the details are as to what happened and make referrals or cite accordingly.
And I just wanna be clear too, whenever we have an investigation that's this early, it's always a possibility that more of something, but it doesn't mean more charges or more citations would be issued. And our primary focus is we want people to come forward if they were there to assist with the investigation that led to that crash in the roadway.
When did responding officers realize there was a second scene, and how did that change what was being investigated at the time?
And you're referring to where Taya, in
Yeah,
Washington County
right.
was located. So while deputies from Washington County were responding to assist us just over the county line, they started receiving phone calls of a person laying in the roadway, and so they, one of the deputies responding to our scene stopped at that scene and realized, there may be a connection based on the information being provided 3 miles north of that location, from our scene.
Was there a vehicle tied with that by her, or it was just her?
You asking if there's a vehicle connected to the crash by the,
I don't follow the question, I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
Was it just her in the road, or was the vehicle
yes.
with, or did he flee?
I'm sorry, yes, she was laying in the road, by herself, no vehicle around.
Is there any potential that the person, and not saying that, is there any potential that the person that dragged Taya could have also been the person that hit one of the other passengers or driver, whoever it was also in the car and ejected into the roadway?
Yeah, that, I did cover that. That is what we believe happened, is that same vehicle that left the scene with her under it is, the same vehicle that struck the other victim that's, still alive.
Okay, thank you.
So, with that, I think
Yeah.
we're gonna conclude the press conference today. We hope, to have more information next week and,
we really appreciate your
Thank you.
patience. I know a lot of people are asking you questions, and we try to give updates as timely as we can. The complexity of this was a little bit different, so thank you for your patience as well.
Can I please get a spelling of the name when you have a chance?
Sure, I will get that and print it and photocopy those 2 names that I, read off so that you have the proper spelling, and, I will get that right now.
Awesome,
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you both.